Hi there, welcome back to the Reach Football Show. This week, a post-mortem after the longest and most dramatic Premier League season we have ever seen. We want you to get involved as well. Tweet me at Mirror Darren, or you can tweet any of the guys. Their hashtags will be on the screen as well, their Twitter handles. We want to know what your thoughts are on the Player of the Year, the best keeper, the best game that you've seen. Goal of the season. Lots of people contend with the view that Son Heung-min's goal against Burnley was the goal of the season. Some say Kevin De Bruyne's strike the other day was a lot better. What do you think? Let us know here on the Reach Football Show. In the meantime, the Foxes, the Wolves, and the Hornets we'll be discussing on the show. We'll also look at the top four and how it shapes up ahead of next season. But first of all, let's get an overview on what we've seen over the past 10 months or so. Let's start with you, Chief Football Writer Andy Dunn. Just to remind you, you know who's on the show this week, the Duns and the Crosses. Andy, the Chief Sports Writer of the Daily Mirror. John Cross is the Chief Football Writer of the Daily Mirror. Jeremy Cross is the Chief Sports Writer of the Daily Star. And of course, as ever, Matt Dunn from his local Waterstones is the football correspondent of the Daily Express. So back to you, Andy. What do you make of the season that we've had so far? A vintage campaign in which we've seen classic champions, or an underachieving top four and Liverpool taking advantage?
I think we've seen great champions, landmark champions in the way they won the Premier League, the run they went on, the early stage they won it at. I think we have seen underachieving elite clubs. Manchester City to a certain extent, although, in the end they score 100 plus goals. They lost some games they obviously shouldn't have lost. So I wouldn't really sort of class them in that underachieving bracket in the sense that they did lose some games they should have won. But overall, they played some sensational football. The underachieving teams that you would have to look at are the other members of what we would call the Big Six. So we're talking Chelsea, we're talking Arsenal, we're talking Manchester United, and we're talking Spurs in particular. Those are the teams, those four to me, and I do bracket Chelsea in that, even though, I know maybe some of the guys on the panel here think that Frank Lampard has done a very, very good job in his first season. I'm probably not as bullish, as enthusiastic about what he's done as most of my colleagues, both within Reach and elsewhere, are. I think those four teams have all disappointed to a certain extent. Man United obviously pulled it round. So I do think that the actual competition for Liverpool, it was left to Manchester City, and they came up short in the end. They came up a long way short. But the rest of the Big Six also, I think, need to look at themselves, and they didn't make it as good title race as we might have hoped for, as exciting a title race as we might have hoped for. That is, of course, because Liverpool swept all before them. I'm sure we'll come on to that. At the other end of the table, I do think that was, relatively interesting. Norwich, from some way out, it was slightly disappointing that it was obvious they were going to go down. But the rest of it, was quite exciting down there. Overall, obviously, it's an unusual season, a one-off season. And I think what we must say at some point is, even for the sceptics like myself, who was not sure whether the Premier League should resume in the circumstances it did, I was very sceptical. And you have to say credit to the Premier League, to the Football League in terms of the Championship, to Richard Masters, the Chief Executive of the Premier League, for the way they got the season done. I just did not anticipate it would get done without any hitch at all, really. Slightly surreal, slightly unusual. Football maybe not as good as we would like, with crowds involved. But hey, they were compromises, and they compromised in a brilliant way, and got the season finished. We had an exciting race for the Champions League slots. We had an exciting battle to avoid relegation. We had great champions. So in the end, it was the right decision to come back.
Now, I will come back to you in a while, Andy, to ask what your best game of the season has been, because all of us have covered some dramatic action over the past 10 months or so. But still, just to get thoughts going around the room on the overview of the season so far. Let's go to you, Matt Dunn. What do you make of the season that we've had over the past 10 months?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Andy for that spare roll of wallpaper so that I could make this shirt. It's very kind of you, Andy. I think what's come out as a theme of this season is how important managers are. Jurgen Klopp, let's not get it wrong. Jurgen Klopp's won that title for Liverpool. He's shown with his amazing managerial ability how a team that have failed to achieve what they wanted to for 30 years can do it. At the same time, Frank Lampard's rebuilt a club. I think he's done a bit better than Andy says. That's my personal view, but at least he's moving in the right direction. Arsenal realised too late that they had the wrong manager, but now they're in a cup final with a new manager who could be better for them in the long term. And at the opposite end of the scale, if you have 4 managers in a season, then you're not going to do very well, which I think is an abject lesson that Watford have taught us. Sean Dyche, meanwhile, has kept Burnley up in the hunt. Chris Wilde has done wonderful things at Sheffield United. And I think this has been the season with everything that's gone on. It's been about managers. And I think for years they've been undervalued in terms of financially and everything else. And I think it's time that we need to recognise that more and more.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think as far as managers are concerned, you look at Wilder, you look at Solskjaer. Lots of people underrated him, and he ended up steering Manchester United from an impossible position, seemingly, into the big time of the Champions League.
You've got to remember that was Solskjaer's impossible position as well, though, wasn't it?
Elaborate on that.
Well, because he took United, he oversaw their difficult start to the season and then resurrected it and got them to where they wanted to be. I think the proof of Solskjaer's ability to manage is how he deals with Pogba when he gets his next cob on and decides he doesn't want to play football anymore. I think that would be the measure of how good a manager Solskjaer is. Because I think a lot of United had to do with Pogba's change of mood.
Look at what we're doing here. Red Top tabloid newspaper, and we're characterising this guy as having a cob on. I mean, are we being fair to him when we say that? He has been impressive when he's come back. There are lots of players. Listen, if you buy someone that good, surely it's incumbent on you as a football club to surround him with the quality to get the best out of him, surely.
And that's what Solskjaer did eventually in January, which is, I think, why his mood has been better in that he had Fernandes there as a foil. So it wasn't all about him. There were lots of quotes knocking around in autumn time about the timing of various operations that he could have and whether he could play on through the pain barrier and all the rest of it. And there was clearly a distrust between management and the player over how he was looking after his body, what he was doing, on the pitch, off the pitch. And there was definitely a disjoint there. But since Pogba's come back and found a team with Fernandes making it work better, so the pressure's not all on him, he can enjoy himself more without having to carry the team. They've got the best out of him. But he is a player that can be brilliant, but also can look disinterested. I don't know whether he is disinterested, but that's certainly the impression he gives sometimes. And when he's in that sort of mood, it's how you manage the team out of that. But I think ultimately it'll test whether, Solskjaer is a good manager, whether that means having to get rid of him or somehow finding a way to get the best out of him. That's what will determine whether we see Solskjaer as a good manager or not.
Okay, we'll come back to you. John Cross, talk to us about your season.
My season, I do think it's been an incredible season, and I do think the authorities, the Premier League, the EFL, and the Football Association deserve so much credit because look, it's almost pointless talking about what went before. I mean, Liverpool are absolutely out on their own. They're the best team by far. The sensational, best goalkeeper in the world, in my view, right now. Best fullbacks, best centre half in the world. The midfield is still kind of a wonderful kind of mix and match. That basically it's interchangeable, and whichever way they do it, it seemed to work. And then the front three is just magnificent. But it's such a bizarre season, a unique season, that it's almost pointless talking about what went before, because the job of work then the authorities got, that put into place bearing in mind, we've been on this show and we've had conversations whereby we just didn't think the season would finish. But I think, I echo absolutely everything that Andy Dunn was saying. So just to move it on slightly, I just want to kind of highlight almost the final day of the Championship, because I think that the Premier League brings its own drama, but the final day of the Championship out on its own was so exciting, was so dramatic, that you basically saw teams survive, then go down. You saw that incredible goal swing which then took Forest out of the playoff positions and pushed Swansea back in there. You saw kind of West Brom out the top two, then back in it as Brentford kind of blew it. And I just thought that almost typified this crazy, crazy season. You know, the FA Cup final for me is such a big thing. I love the FA Cup. I'm so passionate about the FA Cup. And then the way that the Football Association managed to carry that off for the two semi-finals was really quite something. And then indeed the kind of the Liverpool trophy presentation, I thought was something special, simply because I just thought if one event sort of kind of typified the challenges ahead, that you had this hastily arranged stage on the Kop with Kenny Dalglish and Richard Masters handing out the medals. You know, Kenny Dalglish was embracing every Liverpool hero before him. Richard Masters didn't know quite what to do, whether to kind of fist pump, shake hands, or kind of, touch elbows in the most bizarre circumstances. But it still felt like a celebration. And I just thought it was an amazing kind of end to the season. And then the final day, still had the Champions League places up for grabs, still had the relegation scrap there. I cannot believe, by the way, that basically, people still go on about that Aston Villa Sheffield United goal as if, Hawkeye is a mistake. It's a technical error. I actually don't blame Bournemouth, don't get me wrong, in basically sort of kind of, taking legal action because they bought into it. If the equipment has let them down, well, actually, I think they're probably right to kind of take some legal recourse. So I'm not begrudging them that. But then equally, to suggest then that kind of Liverpool... to suggest then that Villa wouldn't have changed their approach, having gone 1-0 down, is just naive. They would have gone and chased the game. Who knows? They might have gone and won the game and got 2 extra points rather than just the one. It's just, it's just ludicrous. But it typifies the madness, I think, of the season, and what an incredible roller coaster ride. We'll never ever forget this year, and basically it will be. Liverpool's title will be, the first one in 30 years and be defined by the lockdown season. It doesn't detract from it in any way. In fact, actually, I would argue it makes it even more special.
Does all the more special for you, Jeremy?
Firstly, can I just say, very remiss of John Cross to talk about the Championship and not mention Leeds getting promoted.
Yes. Sorry, Jeremy.
Yeah, look, I agree with everything the guys have said. It's been, a very, very odd season. And sadly, despite Liverpool's great success and landmark achievement, it will always be remembered for other circumstances, which made it the longest season ever. But yeah, look, for me, it was a bit, as great as Liverpool were to watch and as fantastic as it was to see them end that long way, it was a bit disappointing because there was no one to challenge them, really. City were blown out of the water by Christmas, really, and Guardiola actually did a press conference around about Christmas time and basically conceded defeat. So, we spent months knowing what was going to happen, and that was slightly disappointing because Chelsea and Tottenham and Man United, they couldn't launch a challenge. So, it wasn't great in that sense. And the relegation went to the last day, and that was exciting, I have to say. And the rest of it, in my opinion, is just mid-table mediocrity, really. So you've got almost 3 divisions in one division, and the difference between those levels of football is quite vast. So, Liverpool were fantastic, great to watch, great manager, worthy champions, and I think the teams that went down deserve to go down.
What was your game of the season, Jeremy?
Probably Sheffield
United. Covered, not that you watched, that you covered. The one where you enjoyed it, but you still had to do a match report around it, and afterwards you felt...
Yeah, Sheffield United, probably Man United, 3-3, Bramall Lane. fantastic game, end-to-end stuff. You know, that's all you ever want from a game of football. 6 goals. Sheffield United have been a fantastic story this season. They've missed out on Europe ultimately, but that shouldn't detract from what a great job Wilder's done there. And they what they've done this season basically is they have gone at teams. They have got their own philosophy and way of playing, and it's worked really well for them. You know, they've shown teams respect, but not too much respect, and that has been the way to go for them. And they really took it to United, and United played well too. It was just one of those games where you just, you know, you had 500 words to write, but you just couldn't get it all in, basically.
What about you, Andy Dunn? What was your game of the season?
You know, the games I remember most were actually probably all involving the runaway champions. You know, one game that sticks in my mind, it wasn't my game of the season, but I think it summed up what this Liverpool were all about. Was, I think it was either end of October or beginning of November, round about then anyway, and Liverpool were at Aston Villa, and they were 1-0 down, and it was, you know, Villa Park is one of my favourite stadiums. The place was absolutely rocking. It was fantastic. Great old school atmosphere. Liverpool 1-0 down, pressing for an equaliser. And not only did they get the equaliser, I think Andy Robertson got the equaliser, but then Sadio Mane, my choice for Football of the Year, popped up and scored the winner in added time. And the amount of times I saw Liverpool do that sort of thing just typified why they won the league. I saw them do it against Leicester at Anfield when they won a penalty in the dying moments of the game. I think Sadio Mane won that penalty as well. And that, to me, summed it up. But the game that actually sticks out most, mainly because it's probably one of the most recent, and it was one of the last ones I covered before lockdown. It wasn't quite the last one. I think Man United, Man City was the last one I covered before lockdown, was actually Liverpool's unbeaten run ending at Watford. I mean, who would believe that now? The abject way in which Watford ended the season and were relegated, yet it was only, I think, a week before lockdown that Liverpool went there with that long unbeaten run, looking for a record, and Watford beat them 3-0. I remember at that game and watching Sarr scored the first goal, and I remember thinking, right, well, it's just, you know, you sat there and you're thinking, I'm not going to even start writing this because you know that Liverpool are going to come back in the same way that they did against Villa when I saw them there. And they didn't. Instead, Sarr got a second, and I think Troy Deeney got the third. And you were struggling to believe what you were seeing. Watford, of all teams, the team to take down Liverpool. And now you look back at that and you think, you know, how did that happen? How did Watford do that? And then capitulate as they did, you know, so badly post-lockdown, and are now relegated. So that's the one that sticks in my mind the most. You know, I've seen others on TV that I didn't cover that I think were memorable. Even just the other week, Liverpool-Chelsea, which I wasn't actually at that game, was a remarkable match for so many reasons. But that Watford-Liverpool game is one that will stick in my mind.
You know, when you were at that game, at what point did you think, I'm sitting on a big story here? This is developing into this is going to be an upset.
Pretty much when they got the third goal. I mean, you know, when they got the second goal, you suspect him. But when Watford get the first goal, not long after half-time, you just, as I say, I'd seen Liverpool so many times, you know, come back from or tough it out. I saw them the other week, for example, when they were playing, I think it was Villa at home, and it was 0-0 after 70 minutes. You just know Liverpool were going to score. You know, you always got that feeling. It reminded you, the Liverpool of this season almost reminded you of the vintage United under Sir Alex Ferguson, is that you always knew that they were going to come again, that they were going to score late on. Their goals late on was always going to happen. And you certainly thought that at Watford that day. But then, again, the place was, as we all know, when you go to Watford, that place can, you know, be so energised by their team. And it was, and the place was absolutely rocking. Of course, it was, and a significant result. But, I mean, not significant in terms of the title, because even by then, we knew that Liverpool were going to win the title. It didn't actually make any, you know, I don't know what the points difference was then, but, you know, it probably meant they were 20 points clear instead of being 23 clear, something like that. But yeah, it was, and it also summed up what you would like to see about the Premier League. In the same way, I guess, that very early on the season, the Norwich 3, Manchester City 2 result, you know, was very similar. The kind of result that we like to think in the Premier League, we like to think as watching the Premier League likes to think itself that and you hear this trotted out week in, week out. Well, the great thing about the Premier League is that every team has a chance of beating every other team. And that is just patently not true. I mean, look at Liverpool and Manchester City's results. Yes, City have been beaten a few times, but over the course of a few seasons, you look at it, and basically, it's not true. There are big teams, there are small teams, like in any league. So when Watford managed to turn over Liverpool, or when Norwich turned over Man City, that's what we like.
Right, Don, what was your game of the season?
Funny Andy should mention that Norwich versus Man City game, because I drew what looked like a short straw on my wife's birthday to be sent all the way up there to cover what looked like a fairly straightforward match. And it turned into an absolute belter. It was Norwich not only took the lead, but went 2 goals in front. And you thought, oh, hang on. But still didn't believe it. Aguero scored right on the stroke of half time. And you thought, this is where City sort themselves out, come strong in the second half, run away with it. But then Norwich scored again. And it was you sort of that Carrow Road atmosphere when it did get going on the few odd occasions it did this season was so lively. It's so intense there. And then when De Bruyne came on just before the hour mark, he completely turned the game on its head, and it was backs to the wall stuff, and it was exactly what you'd expect. They got 1 goal back, but couldn't quite get the second. You could feel the tension, and this was, remember, 5 games into the season when anything seemed possible. You were wondering, perhaps Norwich are here to stay. Will City be able to hold off Liverpool at the time? And it was just anything seemed possible back then, and it was just such a remarkable result that it's kind of why the Premier League is exciting. But as Andy says, those games are few and far between, unfortunately, not quite as common as we like to think they are.
John Cross, what was your game of the season?
Well, can I cheat a little bit, Dazza? Because you slightly caught me unawares, because I thought it was going to be, and I wasn't at the game, but I just thought it was, if I have to choose a game that I was at, it would be a Champions League game, actually. It was Chelsea 4, Ajax 4, which was just an astonishing goal fest. But I actually was going to go for Southampton 0, Leicester 9. It was just that basically, it was just, I missed what you said there, doesn't it? I just thought it was the most incredible game. And it's a game that we've spent the rest of the season talking about, because I just think that the way that Southampton reacted after that game is just, and has been just nothing short of miraculous and incredible. They deserve so much credit. The way that Hasenhüttl and the players have turned that down, it should break that club. The manager should be gone the next day, and basically, then they sort of plummet and basically go down as the bottom club beyond salvation. But massive credit to Southampton. They stick with their manager, and they were proved right to do so. And their response has been phenomenal. And, I think that they've basically produced and recovered. I know we could talk about kind of, season-defining games at the top of the table, but actually I thought that was, and a game that we still talk about, a game that sent shockwaves through the division. We were talking about it for weeks on end. We still remember it. It'll be one of the most memorable moments of any season, that sort of thumping defeat, and the way that Southampton have responded and come back. And Hasenhüttl has shown his class and got himself a new deal, and is clearly to take the man to take Southampton forward on a different path. I think that's my game of the season, because I just think the reaction and response has been phenomenal from Southampton, who deserve so much credit.
You Mirror Boys need to get out more, you Mirror Boys, because I was at that one as well. So I don't know, what have you guys been doing? What games have you been watching all season?
Do you really want to get into this conversation, Danny?
I know you do get around, Crossy. But what I would say is that the reason I didn't mention that game as opposed to the Norwich one is it didn't seem fair for Southampton to be remembered and their fans, who had the Leicester fans chanting, "Why are you still here?" from about 5 onwards. But they stoically stood there in freezing cold wind and rain and watched all 9 goals go in, a lot of them. And then they missed their highlight of the season, which was beating City, because they weren't allowed in the ground. So that's why I didn't go for the Southampton game, because I think, like John says, it was a remarkable turnaround for the club. That was obviously their lowest point. And sadly for the fans, they weren't there for their highest point.
But the thing is, Matt, and the interesting thing about that, how good Southampton have done, is that they didn't immediately bounce back. If I remember rightly, they probably lost the next 2 games after that. I think they lost to Everton at home. They lost away at City, funny enough, the next game, if I remember. I think they got beat 2-1 at City the next game, and then lost to Everton, and then drew. So it was like 4 games until they won a game after that 9-0. So massive credit to the board for sticking by, and then, and the amount of points they've got since then. And that's why I think Southampton are actually, one of the stories of the second half of the season, definitely.
My game of the season was Spurs 2, Bayern Munich 7. I was at that game, and it was one of those games where you're in the press box, and when the 5th goal goes in and you see the way that Spurs fall apart, you think to yourself, my evening's going to be a lot longer, because you start thinking, are we talking about resignation territory? It was Pochettino's worst night by far as Spurs manager. And it was one of the worst defeats in Tottenham's history. And I think sometimes when you have nights, and guys, feel free to come back in on this, but when you have nights like that, it stops being about the match, doesn't it? And starts being about the bigger story, the wider story, the fallout. Where do you go beyond the 90 minutes here at the stadium? Who wants to come in on that?
Well, I will as well, because I was there as well, Darren, that night. And I think with that, Spurs didn't actually play that badly to start with. But then Bayern really showed how much a class they were above. And I personally felt, although obviously things weren't right at the time at Spurs, I didn't think it was going to be that bad, because I think just as they later showed against Chelsea, they're a very good side and can do that, put in that sort of performance. But yeah, you are right. You are conscious of the fact you've got to try and capture the gravitas of this, like with the 9-0. When big results happen like that, it isn't just a win. It's a seismic win. And yeah, you as the goals keep clicking over, you think, oh, yeah, what is going on here?
Do you look at the season's VAR fails, guys, all of you, and feel, and I will start with you, Matt, this time. Do you look at the season's VAR fails and feel that they overshadowed what has been a terrific campaign?
I don't think they overshadowed it, because we've got this far without mentioning it into the programme in our recap, and I think the football has come first. But
it's been on the agenda, don't worry about that.
It's been a horrible nuisance that's dogged the whole season. And just, the Premier League delayed for a year introducing VAR while they were supposed to be looking at it behind closed doors, running it as live, doing all these tests. But for them to get it so badly wrong after all that testing, it's not good enough. They need a massive, well, I'm not sure they'll be allowed to have a massive rethink whether FIFA will take control of that process. But we can't have a VAR season like the one we've just had again.
Well, I think we missed the point here, guys, on VAR, in that basic VAR is at Stockley Park. It's not an official video which is going to be absolutely definitive. It still comes back to the fact that basically it's the officials manning the video technology, and frankly, we're all saying, aren't we, that basically some of the officials, the drop in standards has been alarming. And so if they're making mistakes on the pitch, they're likely to make mistakes off the pitch. Listen, I think that VAR, it hasn't been ideal. I wish the referees would go and check their pitch side monitors. Mike Riley kind of hid behind the kind of the fact that he was sort of saying that that they were able to do so. Well, the fact is that the referees were encouraged not to do so. So I hope that basically FIFA and UEFA coming in to oversee it under Kalina will give the referees a little bit more license to go and check the video and be in charge of it. But also, guys, we've got to remember the fact that VAR is only enforcing some of the rules and some of the laws which are just not, I don't think, very good in the first place. The handball being the obvious example. I mean, Harry Kane's goal disallowed at Sheffield United was just a farce. But that's not VAR's fault. That's the handball law. I mean, that handball law is being tweaked, so it comes into the T-shirt remit, if you like, for next season. So let's see how that goes. But I just think we need to persevere with VAR. have a little bit more understanding, go and check the monitors, and hopefully I think that the tweaks that will maybe bring the Premier League into line with the Champions League will make the world of difference.
Let's spin through a couple of other subjects, because I can understand why lots of people went for Jordan Henderson as the FWA Player of the Year. And just to be clear, it's about your impact on and off the pitch. I think Virgil van Dijk, for me, would have been my Player of the Year, precisely because if you take him out of the Liverpool team, I don't think they win the league. I think there are a number of statistics that underline his impact on the Liverpool side. Guys, should the Football Writers Player of the Year, given what we write about all year round, going to games, seeing the games, gushing about the impact that players make, should it be about what you do on the pitch or off the pitch?
Well, obviously the citation, the original citation from one of the founder members of the Football Rights Association, Charles Buchan, was who by precept and example. It's not a phrase that people use very often anymore. The word precept isn't a word that we tend to use anymore. And I would say, as former chairman of the FWA, we did set quite a bit of store by that. But we sometimes conveniently forgot that. For example, we conveniently forgot the precept and example part of our citation when we gave the award to Luis Suarez. No one could sort of say that he has led by example in terms of good behaviour on the field. So, I do think that it got brought up this time because it's almost as though, it's not want to justify it, but it's almost as though it's, we're trying to underline why Jordan Henderson got so many votes. And by doing that, you are actually making a sort of a tacit admission that actually a lot of people didn't think he was the best footballer in the Premier League last season. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think there was a case to be made for voting for Jordan Henderson purely on a football basis, in the sense that out of the team, in the, I think, 7 or 8 games that he missed, Liverpool dropped more points in those games than they did for the 30 games that he played in. So there is actually a statistical basis where actually is Liverpool a better team, a far better team with Jordan Henderson in it, or with him out of the team? And I think the case is that he's a leader on the pitch. And I think probably as much as for the example he set off the pitch, which was wonderful, he also won it for being a leader on the pitch. And being a leader on the pitch is part of being a footballer. So I think it's totally justifiable that he won it on that basis. I do think there was a great argument. It's a great discussion. I think everyone would admit that in terms of the most accomplished footballer, as in technique, talent, what he produced on the pitch in terms of those type of things, then he probably wasn't the footballer of 2019-20. That could have been my vote went for Sadio Mane, because I thought he was a game changer so regularly for that Liverpool team. A lot of people might have thought it was Kevin De Bruyne because he was brilliant week in, week out. But I think it was, I don't think we should have to rely on this idea that we gave it to Jordan Henderson just because he's a good bloke who did good things off the pitch. We gave it to him because he's also a leader on the pitch, and it was inspirational. And listen, I know it was the end of last season, but not only in this Premier League win, but in the Champions League win of last season.
Jeremy Cross?
Yeah, listen, I agree with a lot of what Dunny said. Henderson, look, my worry would have been, did he get it because of outside influences, like the fact that he did such a wonderful thing in leading the campaign to raise money for the NHS out of the players' pockets? That was great. Did that come into the voting or the thinking of people who voted? Maybe so. If you look at him as a footballer, he's a great footballer. He is the driving force of the best team in the land. And without him, I'm not saying they wouldn't have won the league, but they wouldn't have got as many points. Maybe the title race would have been close. They wouldn't have been as dominant. My issue is, I like to see or vote for a player who gets you on the edge of your seat, basically. I get what you're saying about Van Dijk. He's probably the best defender in the world. And, titles are won by defenders, not strikers, basically. So, he has his own merits as well. But I would have voted for De Bruyne simply because when you watch him play, he's just wonderful to watch. He can do everything. He's the complete player. He can curl it into the top corner from 30 yards. He can beat 3 players. He can play an 80-yard ball. He can tackle. He can run. He can do everything. So, look, it's all about entertainment football. And well, Henderson is a great player and has great qualities and does that role he's given superbly well. He's not an edge of your seat player, whereas De Bruyne is, like Lionel Messi is, like Ronaldo is. He's in that bracket now. So, he's my player of the year.
John Cross.
Well, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? I must say, I do passionately believe that it should be someone, unless exceptional circumstances, it should be someone from the dominant team of the season. And more often than not, that means the title winners. And that's why I would have definitely, would always go for. I see De Bruyne's merits. I mean, he's just amazing. He's had an incredible season. But I did vote Jordan Henderson. I thought Jordan Henderson was an incredible leader on and off the pitch. I do buy into that kind of precept and example. But to that end, obviously, you could have had your pick, really, couldn't you? You could have had Marcus Rashford for his work against poverty, for children, which was incredible. Raheem Sterling, again, sort of, his anti-racism campaign, absolutely fantastic. And, go back to the fact that you could have had De Bruyne. But I just think that
before you make your point, Crossy, before you make your point, that's a very, very, very valid point you've just made, because if you're talking about precepts and examples, there are lots of players up and down the Premier League. I mean, Dunny's absolutely right. We did forget about it when it was Suarez. But, precepts and examples means that there are so many players who don't make a song and dance about the things they do. Zaha, for example, donating his properties to the NHS staff during the coronavirus pandemic. Mark Noble donating, the money that he received for writing a column to local charities in Canning Town. There are so many players up and down the Premier League who don't shout about what they do, but have the kind of leadership and show good examples that Henderson did. So where does that leave us?
Well, I agree with you. And that's why I felt that, listen, I think Henderson, as Danny rightly said, basically has been an incredible and inspirational leader and figure on the pitch for the best team in the country, bar none. But I think coupled with that, it would be wrong to deny that basically also that Henderson hasn't played a massive part in himself. Let's rewind, say, what was it, 2.5 months ago or so, that basically footballers found themselves in the eye of a storm. That basically they were put there by government ministers, ridiculous Matt Hancock comments and so on, questioning footballers and their role. I mean, footballers have their voice and made themselves heard in a way, and they are listened to by a huge part of the society, and indeed a whole generation from now on, but in a way that politicians simply aren't anymore. Their voice is just not listened to in the way that footballers are, and so they can make that difference. It's just astonishing. I mean, listen, we could almost go back to the fact that, couldn't we, about Mesut Ozil? Look at what Mesut Ozil does, and then Mesut Ozil takes stick for refusing kind of to take a pay cut. Why? Because he didn't want to take a pay cut, because it's his money, because he wants to donate it where he wants. But people just don't see that sort of side of it. But what I'm trying to say is that I think that Jordan Henderson, epitomises both aspects of that. And I think by voting for Jordan Henderson, I didn't just vote for what Jordan Henderson did on the pitch. I voted for what he did off the pitch. And to that end, I want to acknowledge the role that the players had in this. And that I felt in my own mind, by voting for Henderson, I was almost voting for Rashford. I was almost voting for Sterling. I was almost voting for those others that have played such a huge role. Harry Maguire, at Man United, played a big role in the NHS charities together. It has been a seismic season. It's been a moment in time for football. It's been a moment in time for footballers throughout this crisis, where I think the footballers have stood out and been incredible, exceptional role models. I mean, there have been mistakes along the line. Let's not paint them all as angels and heroes. Let's get that right. But the vast majority have. And I just think that basically they deserve that recognition. That's why, in my own mind, as I say, I was voting for Henderson on and off the pitch. But there was a massive kind of tip of the hat to the others that have played an equally incredible, crucial role.
let's look ahead. Let's look ahead to next season, because the resurgence of Manchester United getting into the top four, none of us would have predicted that ahead of the current campaign. And even midway through the current campaign, Chelsea too have done a terrific job. Frank Lampard has done a terrific job there. And Arsenal as well look to be going in the right direction. They've reached the FA Cup final under Mikel Arteta. All of you have a little think about what you think your top four will be next season, by the end of next season. How far do you think that progress will continue for each of the other three clubs that have surprised us all? Maybe even Spurs, top six under Jose Mourinho, could they be back in the mix as well? What are your thoughts ahead of next season as we cast our minds forward? Start with you, Jeremy Cross.
Well, my ultimate hope is that it's a more competitive title race next season, and I think it will be. City could go on to win the Champions League this season. That would give them a huge boost in confidence heading into the domestic season in September. I think, ironically though, I think that the league placings, the top four, will be the same. I mean, it's a big call, who knows? But I think Liverpool will win the title again next season. I think City will finish second. I think Man United will be third. I don't think they're going to be in a position to bridge that gap that still exists between the top two and themselves. They will obviously sign players in the summer transfer window, which will make them stronger. And they need to get rid of some dead wood that's hanging around United. But Solskjaer's been good at that so far, actually. He's been pretty ruthless with players like Lukaku, like Sanchez. So I'm sure you'll see some departures. Chelsea have made some good signings in the last 8 months, so they'll be strong. I don't think Tottenham will get in the top four next season. I just have this feeling that I just think under Mourinho, they have picked up in the last few weeks, but I just think they're not going to be strong enough to be in the top four. So I just hope that City and Liverpool go toe-to-toe next season like they did the previous season. That'd be fantastic. I don't think much will change in the top four.
Andy Dunn?
I think that Liverpool will win the title again. I don't see anything changing in their in how relentless they're going to be. They're not going to lose any key players. I think the issue is going to be whether or not City can make a better fist of challenging them for the title. And I suspect that City's concern will be more, basically whether it's them or Manchester United who challenge Liverpool for the title. Manchester City, don't forget, lost 9 games this season. Lost 9 games. Now, there's a reason in that, why, and that's because they can't defend. They can't defend at that level, to the level an elite team should. What's going to change in that? Well, at the moment, I assume they will sign someone, but let's wait and see. But that defence needs wholesale changes. They haven't got a left-back really as a bona fide left-back. You couldn't make a bona fide left-back out of Mendy and Zinchenko combined, the left wingers. They've got a lot of work to. Don't forget, we talk about David Silva going. It's, this emotional end to a glorious Manchester City career. Well, let's face it, when you strip it away, they're also losing, as we've seen in the games of lockdown, they're also losing a very, very, very good influential player from their team, having already lost Leroy Sané. Aguero obviously has his injury issues. Fernandinho is getting to a stage where, he'll play a lesser part. I think City have got really big issues to deal with. I think Guardiola's got really big issues to deal with. They concede goals too readily against the big teams. And I actually think that for those of us expecting just City to go to duke it out toe-to-toe with Liverpool, I think that's overly optimistic. I think City have got big issues to sort out, and I think United, United have beaten City a couple of times, will fancy their chances of actually going toe-to-toe with City, and might prove to be more, as stronger challengers to Liverpool as City are.
All right, Andy, so you say that City have got problems. When you go to the Etihad next season, do you expect to see a reinforced City? Big money spent, they're back in the Champions League, as we all now know. Do you expect them to go big in the summer transfer window?
Yeah, well, I certainly expect them to sign defenders, Darren. You just cannot see. He seems to have lost complete faith in that game against Arsenal, the FA Cup game. You wonder why why they lost that game. Well, they've got a defence there that consists of, Kyle Walker, who, as I say, hasn't been in best form recently, and has sort of gone out of favour with England. As I say, the left backs, they might play Cancelo there. He might be an answer. But then you've got a centre-half pairing of Laporte and a teenager in Eric Garcia, because he doesn't fancy John Stones. You have to expect him to somehow come up with solutions at the centre of defence and our fullbacks. So I would expect him to sign one or two defenders. And if that works out, then I think they clearly will be a force, because they are the best team to watch, I think, just easily. I mean, I would, if you gave me a £20 note and said, right, as a neutral, you either go and watch Liverpool or you go and watch Manchester City, it will be City. This is the team that makes a habit of scoring 5 past teams. I mean, literally, it is a habit of theirs to score 5 past teams. 102 goals this season. And every one of them probably box office type goals. So they're fantastic to watch. They will continue to be fantastic to watch. If they don't sort out the whole back line as a unit defending, then they're not going to challenge Liverpool again.
Listen, I actually think the top 4 will be, in whatever order, next season, as it is this season. There's generally a surprise package, so it'll probably be wrong. But the one that worries me a little bit is not so much City, because I think City will strengthen and go for it big time this summer. I really do. I think they'll buy central defenders. I think they might sort of kind of strengthen up front, kind of try and replace Sane, give themselves another option there. So I do think that they will spend and go for it and make a better fist of the title chase. What really interests me is the fact that Liverpool, I think that basically, can you and should you, when I think the very best teams, when they are on top and when they are dominant, they strengthen and go again. And I think that basically Liverpool, the reasons for not strengthening are obvious. It's a financial aspect, and clearly they are banking on some fantastic youngsters, coming through, like Elliot Williams and Curtis Jones. And so don't get me wrong, they've got some good players coming through that will add to the squad. But I do think sometimes to stand still is to go backwards. I mean, blimey, they've got a bit of room for margin for error, because they've won it last week this year. So can anyone make up the difference? I'm not sure. Where would you improve, John? Where
would you improve?
Well, Liverpool, I think basically, does it, all things being equal, if it were the normal season that we would have looked at, I feel sure that they would have got Timo Werner this summer. And Timo Werner would have been a different aspect. And obviously that was partly in mind, wasn't it? Because they would lose players for the African Cup of Nations. And so he would strengthen and put pressure on. I'm not saying that basically you'd have to be naive to say that basically their front three, isn't anything but, magnificent, arguably the best in Europe. But sometimes you do lose players through injury. And when Origi comes in, he's made an impact. So I just feel...
So is there a player out there right now that goes into that 11 and instantly improves them? That is gettable.
I'm not sure that there is particularly. I just think that Werner would have been the absolute fit. I'll tell you where I do think what will be really noticeable next season is that Liverpool have been so far ahead of the rest. I'm convinced that City will make up some ground. I think this season will really hurt Guardiola. I think Chelsea are, I think that I totally disagree with Andy Dunn. I think Lampard's done an amazing job in his first season of management, and basically will only get better. He knows where he needs to strengthen. The goalkeeper, I think, comes next. If they can do that, if they can basically, buy a couple more to an already expanded, incredibly exciting squad, then I think they'll also go places. And I think Man United, since Fernandes has come in, I mean, they've been fabulous. And I think that basically what you'll see is a bit more of a title race next season, and there'll be less of a margin. I'd still actually fancy Liverpool win the title, but I think it'll be a much more exciting, closer race.
So go on then, go around the table. Liverpool for you, City second. Who's third next season?
United.
Okay, United third for you. Who's fourth, Jeremy?
Chelsea.
Okay, and Dunny, shall we try you? Liverpool first.
Liverpool first, United second, City third, Spurs
United.
fourth. Yes,
United second.
United second, City third, Spurs fourth.
Wow. And Crossy.
I'm going to go Liverpool, obviously champions, City second, and then I'll go Chelsea third, United fourth.
Where will Arsenal finish next season, Crossy?
8th, 6th, 7th or 8th.
I love
maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit higher. I think it's going to take you 2 years.
Just below Leeds.
Just below Leeds.
And let's just very quickly, let's just bring you in, Matt Dunn, is still with us. Where do you think Spurs, because I know you cover Spurs, where do you think they'll finish next season?
I think the best they can hope for is 4th. They might nick that, but I think it's going to be a transitional summer for them. I think Mourinho thinks he's got the tools in his box to do well, but it's like, I can't remember who it was who said, if you stand still, you actually fall backwards. And the players he's got aren't the players they were 2 years ago. Yes, Kane, I think, will stay another season, possibly his last. We could be saying that again for another summer. But the other players around, Lo Celso is the one with a bit more Premier League now, might make a difference. But there's too many weaknesses there that aren't quite up to scratch. He's got to convince us all that Eric Dyer's a centre back. He's got to find someone to play alongside him. I don't think that they've quite got the squad to be genuine top 4. They might get a few lucky results or scratch enough together to nick a place. But yeah, I think that's the outlook for them until they spend some more money.
Okay, one last question before we go. We've only got a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to need very, very brief answers from all of you. What's going to be the saga this summer transfer window? There always is one. We know that Zaha is available for the right price. Kane, as you were talking a second ago, Matt, it made me think of Harry Kane and potentially Manchester City maybe coming in for him. Because I'm not quite sure Jesus is the long-term replacement for Sergio Aguero. But there's just suggestions. What do you guys think? We've only got a couple of minutes, so you'll have to be very, very brief. Start with you, Andy Dunn.
Jack Grealish will be one of the sagas of the transfer window, without a doubt. I think what you'll find is that there'll be so many hurdles. I mean, we're already talking about United sort of cooling their interest because they would prefer Jadon Sancho. Grealish will be the one, and I suspect it will end with him staying at Aston Villa.
Okay, Johnny Cross?
I'm going to go Jadon Sancho. I just think this one's going to be sort of kind of played out a bit, and I think it's clearly overpriced, basically, because I think United clearly want the player. Blimey, can you imagine if he comes in this summer? But I just don't see United paying what Borussia Dortmund ideally want. And I just think that basically, unless they can find a compromise, and listen, ultimately, I think they will. And I think that basically, but I think that the Dortmund will have to compromise a little bit. But I'll tell you what, that one really excites me because I think, one of England's best young talents come to United and already sort of kind of really strong, strike force. Wow, what a signing that would be. But I think it might run them up.
And what about you, Jeremy? What do you think? Will City be in for a player and will that player basically demand to leave, slap the transfer request in? We'll be writing about it over the next couple of months or so and get tired, sick to the back teeth of it.
I think Kane might be an issue. I think if I was Harry Kane, I would be wanting to get out of Tottenham this summer. I mean, he's knocking on now. He's approaching his peak years. Tottenham aren't going to provide him with Champions League football. They aren't going to provide him with trophies. So if I was Harry Kane, I would be going to Levy and saying, "Look, I've done my stint. I want to win things. I don't think I can do that here." And in fact, if I was City, I would be looking at Kane as an ideal replacement for Aguero. Look, Aguero is the club's record scorer. He has massive boots to fill. There, Guardiola, but Kane's capable, and Kane deserves to be playing at the highest level, and he's not doing that with Tottenham. So that could be one to look out for. Darren, I've sent him to sleep.
That's Dunny. Matt Dunn, what's your one to look out for?
I'll chip in here. Well, it's a depressing end to the Reach football show in that I'm going to agree with one cross and disagree with another, and it's not the order that you think. I'm actually going to agree with John Cross and say that I think Jadon Sancho's transfer is going to run and run, because I think there's a feeling in England that prices are going to drop due to the circumstances we're in, and I think some of the German clubs aren't going to necessarily want to drop their prices. So I think that's a negotiation that's going to run on all summer. And on the flip side, I can't see Harry Kane going anywhere this summer. I think he's got his eyes on Euro 2020, as we're still calling it. I think he's prepared to give Tottenham one last chance. I don't think Levy will price him out of a move anywhere else in the Premier League, especially. And I just wonder, with his young family, whether he's ready to uproot before what could be a defining year in his career. So I think, it may become a saga, but ultimately it's not going to happen.
Well, what has happened, Matt, is that you and the guys have treated us to some fantastic entertainment and insight over the past couple of months. And we look forward to that coming back next season. The Reach Football Show has reached the end of its current run. We're going away for our summer holidays and some transfer rumours as well. Stick around on the Mirror Football website and the Daily Express and Daily Star websites and pick up each of those respective publications as well. We will see you in September. We'll see you soon.